It all started with a single piece of paper, a contract buried under years of dust and forgotten promises. No one knew that this one document, hidden in an old drawer, would destroy everything he had built. But when the truth resurfaced, it didn't just take his wealth, it shattered his life. Welcome to today's story. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real stories that reveal how a single choice can change everything. Now let's begin. For years, Daniel Stone had lived the dream. A self-made entrepreneur, his name carried weight in the city. From luxury cars to penthouse views, everything he touched seemed to turn into gold. But Daniel wasn't born into privilege. He had built his empire from the ground up. One deal, one risk, one sleepless night at a time. But behind the polished smile and the tailored suits, there was something he didn't like to talk about. Something buried in his past. A contract he had signed long before he became successful. It was with his first business partner, Ryan. They had started together in a tiny garage, chasing dreams and fighting doubt. But when things went south, Daniel walked away, believing he had cut ties completely. He didn't know that a single, forgotten clause still bound him legally, and that it would come back to haunt him. 10 years later, Daniel was at the peak of his career. Investors trusted him, the media adored him, and people saw him as the symbol of modern success. But Ryan had never forgotten. The years hadn't been kind to him. His business had failed, and his resentment toward Daniel had grown with every passing day. Then, one evening, Ryan stumbled upon an old file. Inside it, faded and creased, was that contract. The same one Daniel had assumed was void. And as Ryan read through it, his eyes widened. There it was, a clause Daniel had overlooked, one that legally entitled Ryan to half of everything Daniel had built under the company's name. The next morning, Daniel received a letter from a law firm. At first, he laughed it off until he saw the signature, Ryan Carter, his former partner, the man he hadn't spoken to in a decade. Within days, the lawsuit hit the headlines. Business tycoon faces legal battle over old contract. The media swarmed him, his investors panicked, and suddenly, the same people who once praised him began to question everything about his empire. Daniel's lawyers were confident at first. "It's old," they said, "outdated. It won't hold." But when they reviewed the documents, their tone changed. The clause was ironclad. Daniel's signature was right there, clear as day. He couldn't believe it. How could something he had signed in his 20s, something he barely remembered, be powerful enough to tear apart everything he had worked for? He had trusted Ryan once, and now that trust had turned into the weapon being used against him. The courtroom became his second home. Every hearing drained him, financially, emotionally, and mentally. Reporters followed him everywhere. Once he was known as the man who built an empire. Now they called him the man who forgot his own downfall. The trial dragged on for months. The tension was unbearable. Every day, Daniel watched his empire crumble a little more. Clients pulled out, partners withdrew, and friends disappeared. He wasn't just fighting Ryan anymore. He was fighting the ghosts of his past, the arrogance of his youth, and the painful realization that success, built on unchecked ambition, always comes with a price. And that's when Daniel realized something. Sometimes what ruins you isn't what you forget, it's what you choose to ignore. He remembered the day he first signed that paper. He had been in a hurry, excited to launch his first business, desperate to move fast. He hadn't read the fine print. "It's just a formality," Ryan had told him. And Daniel, young and impatient, had trusted him. That trust would now cost him everything. As the trial neared its end, Daniel sat alone in his office one evening, surrounded by empty coffee cups and stacks of papers. He looked out at the city he had once ruled, and for the first time, it didn't feel like his anymore. But then came the final day of court, the verdict, the moment that would decide everything. And as Daniel stood before the judge, something unexpected happened, something that would silence the entire courtroom. The courtroom was silent, heavy with tension. Every camera was pointed at Daniel as he stood beside his attorney, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the judge. Ryan sat across from him, calm, collected, almost satisfied. The years of resentment had hardened him, and now, in his eyes, this was justice. The judge's voice broke the silence. After reviewing the evidence, the court finds... He paused, glancing down at the stack of documents before him. Every heartbeat felt like thunder in Daniel's chest. That the original contract signed between Mr. Daniel Stone and Mr. Ryan Carter is legally binding. Therefore, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff. The words hit like a wrecking ball. In that instant, Daniel's world collapsed. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. It was over. Everything he had worked for, the company, the reputation, the wealth, was now divided in half. Ryan didn't smile. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. The victory wasn't about money. It was about finally watching the man who had once left him behind fall from the top. Outside the courthouse, microphones surrounded Daniel. "Mr. Stone, do you have any comment?" He didn't. He just kept walking, face blank, heart hollow. His lawyer whispered, "We can appeal this," but Daniel wasn't sure it mattered anymore. That night, the news channels ran the story non-stop. The forgotten contract that destroyed a fortune. Some called it karma, others called it injustice. But for Daniel, it was something deeper. It was a reminder that the smallest details, the things we overlook, can one day come back to rewrite our entire story. In the following weeks, the consequences were brutal. Clients fled, stocks dropped, and his board of directors voted to remove him as CEO. Overnight, Daniel went from being one of the city's most admired figures to one of its most pitied. The man who built an empire had been undone by his own signature. But the real pain came later. It wasn't losing the money, it was losing his name. The sense of control he once had over his life was gone. Every time he walked through the city, he saw whispers in the eyes of people who once respected him. They didn't need to say a word. The pity was louder than any insult. And yet something inside Daniel refused to break completely. Beneath the humiliation, beneath the anger, there was still a spark. He knew what he had lost, but he also knew that what destroyed him wasn't just a contract. It was his own pride. One evening, as he sat in his now half-empty office, he looked at that same contract again. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but his signature was still bold, confident, untrembling. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "How could I have been so blind?" He remembered the early days, the laughter with Ryan, the late nights planning their first venture, the shared dreams of success. They had both wanted the same thing, but greed had driven them apart. He had wanted to move faster, make more, reach higher, and in that rush, he had left his friend and his integrity behind. Now, as the weight of everything settled on his shoulders, Daniel realized that the real loss wasn't financial. It was human. It was the bond, the trust, the part of himself he had buried under ambition. But then came something unexpected, a call. It was from a young entrepreneur he had once mentored years ago. "Daniel," the voice said. "I don't care about what the media says. I know who you are. I wouldn't have made it without your help." For a moment, Daniel was speechless. In a world that had turned its back on him, one voice reminded him that his story wasn't over yet. That night, he stood by his window, looking out over the city lights. Smaller now, distant. He thought about starting over, not with contracts or investors, but with purpose. Maybe, just maybe, he could build again. This time, not out of greed, but out of gratitude. But before he could move forward, one last truth had to surface, one that Ryan, too, had never expected. Something hidden deep within the pages of that same contract, waiting to turn everything upside down once again. The next morning, Daniel sat at his desk, surrounded by boxes of files, old documents, emails, financial records. Sleep had escaped him. He couldn't stop thinking about that contract, the one piece of paper that had destroyed everything he'd built. But there was something odd about it, something that had been bothering him ever since he looked at it again. He opened the file and began reading, line by line. The legal jargon was dense, but Daniel knew this language better than most. After all, he had drafted hundreds of contracts throughout his career. Then, halfway through page 4, his eyes froze. A single sentence stood out, one he had never noticed before. It read, "In the event of dissolution, all intellectual property shall revert to the original creator." Daniel blinked. That clause, it didn't make sense. He hadn't written that. And Ryan? He wasn't the original creator of the company's intellectual property. Daniel was. That meant the court ruling might not have been entirely accurate. Someone had changed the terms years after the contract was signed. His hands trembled as he dug deeper through the files, searching for digital records, old versions of the agreement. Then he found it, an email chain between his former assistant and Ryan's legal advisor, dated just weeks before the company went public. Attached was a revised document, labeled Final Version, signed. Daniel felt his stomach twist. That was the version the court used. But it wasn't the original. The modification had been made quietly, slipped in, without his approval. And the assistant who had handled those papers. She had mysteriously resigned right after the IPO. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a rush of something familiar. Determination. He wasn't imagining it. There had been deception. The empire he lost wasn't just destroyed by a forgotten contract, it was sabotaged. Without wasting a second, he picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "I need you to review the contract again, the one from the court. Compare it to the first draft we signed." There was silence on the other end. "Daniel, are you saying the document was altered?" "I'm saying," Daniel replied firmly, "someone rewrote history, and I'm going to prove it." That night, the investigation began. Old archives were reopened, servers rechecked, and emails traced. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became. Ryan's team had quietly inserted the clause, exploiting Daniel's trust and the chaos of the company's expansion. When the truth hit him fully, Daniel didn't feel relief. He felt rage, not because of the money, but because the betrayal went deeper than business. It was personal. Ryan hadn't just taken his company, he had taken his loyalty, twisted it, and weaponized it against him. Days turned into weeks. The court's final ruling came 2 weeks later. The forged clause was officially invalidated, Daniel's ownership of the company's intellectual property was restored, and Ryan was ordered to compensate for damages and legal costs. On paper, it was a total victory. The media called it a modern-day redemption story. But for Daniel, the win felt strangely quiet. No joy, No celebration, just silence. He had his life's work back, but the price was years of trust, friendship, and peace of mind. That evening, Daniel went back to the old building, where everything began. The first office, dusty, forgotten, filled with the smell of paper and old coffee. He walked to the corner desk, the same place where he and Ryan had once scribbled their first business idea on a napkin. He sat down and looked around. In those walls, he could still hear the echoes of laughter, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the dreams they built from nothing. For a moment, he closed his eyes, and it all came flooding back. The good, the bad, the betrayal. Then, a voice broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd come back here." Daniel turned. Ryan stood at the door, looking nothing like the confident man he once was. His eyes were tired, his voice subdued. "You've got everything back," Ryan said softly. "Guess congratulations are in order." Daniel didn't respond right away. "Why, Ryan? You could have told me. You could have walked away with honor. Instead, you destroyed everything we built." Ryan sighed. "You don't understand. I was desperate. Investors wanted control, and they said if I didn't give them leverage, the company would collapse. That clause, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought I could fix it later." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't just break the company, you broke me." Ryan stepped closer. "I know, and there's nothing I can say that will fix it, but I wanted you to know. I never stopped respecting what we created, even when I ruined it." There was a long pause. The tension between them wasn't anger anymore, it was exhaustion. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm. "I don't hate you, Ryan. I just can't trust you anymore, and that's the real loss here." Ryan nodded slowly, understanding every word. He looked around the office one last time. "You'll rebuild it better this time," he said. "Without me?" He walked out quietly, leaving the door open behind him. Daniel stayed there for hours, thinking. Not about revenge or justice, but about the cost of ambition and the illusion of control. He had spent his entire life chasing success, believing that power and wealth would give him peace. But now, standing at the end of it all, he finally